The grand ballroom of the Lancaster Hotel shimmered under crystal chandeliers, alive with the hum of chatter and the rustle of high fashion. Tonight was the annual Fashion Gala, an event where elegance was currency and exclusivity the rule. Ivy Monroe stood just inside the entrance, her posture straight but unassuming behind the receptionist's desk. She wore a plain gray blouse and black slacks, far simpler than the glittering gowns and tailored suits passing by. Her brunette hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and a soft smile tugged at her lips as she greeted guests with a measured nod. Around her, the crowd swept by like a tide she felt both apart from and compelled to respect. Eyeing her simple attire, one woman in a diamond necklace whispered to a friend with a smirk loud enough for Ivy to hear. "Looks like someone got lost on their way to the cleaners," she said, glancing dismissively in Ivy's direction. Ivy's accent caught another's glance, eliciting a faint chuckle, assumptions swirling around her as invisible barriers in the midst of opulence. The night unfolded in a blur of glitter and music, a swirl of excitement building with the unveiling of the next designer's collection. Then, without warning, a commotion rippled near the center of the room. A man, clearly a guest, doubled over suddenly, clutching his throat as his face flushed, and then began to swell alarmingly. Eyes widened, whispers turning frantic, as his knees buckled and he collapsed onto the velvet-carpeted floor. The gala froze. Guests stared, breath caught, no one moving swiftly to help as confusion and fear took hold. The room held its breath. A palpable hush rippled through the glittering crowd as the man's body crumpled onto the carpet. Murmurs swelled into uneasy whispers, some guests froze, their eyes wide with shock and fear, while others fumbled frantically for phones, unsure whether to call for help or record the chaos unfolding before them. The polished elegance of the evening shattered, replaced by a rising tide of panic. Security guards glanced at one another, hesitant and uncertain how to respond in the circle of high society they rarely interrupted. The catering staff, in sleek uniforms, hesitated as well, their training ill-equipped for such an urgent medical crisis amid the delicate glitter of the gala. The unfolding scene was surreal, a man struggling desperately for breath, the air around him thickening with tension, while no immediate aid came. Ivy Monroe felt the surge of panic rise around her like an invisible wall that only she seemed willing to pierce. Stepping out from behind the modest reception desk, she moved forward with steady, deliberate steps. Her voice, clear and calmly authoritative, cut through the noise. "Clear space around him, please, give him room to breathe," she said softly but firmly, her words anchored in years of experience. Heads turned toward her, some eyebrows raised, the polished guests eyed the receptionist with quiet skepticism. A young woman seated nearby whispered loudly enough for a few to overhear, "Who does she think she is?" "Just the receptionist." But Ivy didn't falter. Her eyes never left the man's reddening face, her hands steady as she knelt beside him. Recognizing the telltale signs of anaphylaxis, the swelling of the lips and throat, rapid breathing, and changing skin tone, Ivy's training kicked in. She placed one hand gently on the man's forehead to check his pulse while signaling to a nearby waiter. "Please, bring the first aid kit from the staff area. Look for the epinephrine auto-injector." A waiter hesitated, then nodded, hurrying away. Ivy shifted her attention back to the man. "Sir, try to stay calm. Help is on the way. Keep your head slightly elevated but don't sit up, lying flat will help your blood flow." Her voice was steady, each word carefully chosen to avoid alarming him further. Gradually, a few guests began to clear the way, some of the staff moving with more purpose now that Ivy had taken charge. Another guest knelt nearby, helping to loosen the man's tight collar under Ivy's direction, easing the pressure around his neck. Ivy's eyes flicked across the room, spotting one of the event coordinators frozen near the buffet table. "Please call 911 right now," she instructed calmly. Minutes stretched taut with tension before the waiter returned, panting, clutching the small first aid kit. Ivy's fingers moved quickly but carefully, pulling the epinephrine injector from its case and preparing it. "Sir, I'm going to give you a shot now. It will help open your airways," she said softly, trying to convey reassurance. She administered the injection into the man's thigh with steady hands. Almost immediately, his breathing eased a fraction, and the swelling seemed to slow. He still looked terrified, clutching at Ivy's arm for support, but she remained composed. "You're doing well. Help is coming." Guests around the incident shifted from murmurs of uncertainty to a nervous quiet as they watched her command the scene with practiced skill. The earlier whispers questioning her authority faded as Ivy's quiet confidence and decisive actions held the moment together. She instructed a nearby guest to assist with monitoring the man's pulse and breathing, offering clear advice. "If he starts to vomit, turn him on his side. Don't let anyone crowd around him." Then she instructed another to locate a mobile phone and relay the man's condition precisely to emergency responders. Even some members of the event security team moved closer now, their hesitation replaced by respect as they followed Ivy's directions without question. A few whispered to one another about her calm demeanor, a stark contrast to the initial chaos. Outside the immediate circle, guests began to murmur in awe. One older gentleman, who had been seated at a nearby table, leaned over to his companion and said, "She knows exactly what she's doing. Look at how calm she is." Ivy, despite the pressure, seemed unaffected by the stares or the shifting crowd. Her focus remained fixed on the man's care, her voice gentle as she continued to reassure him. "You're safe. We're taking care of you." After several agonizing minutes, the catastrophic moment stabilized just enough for precious breaths to come easier. An ambulance siren sounded faintly in the distance, growing closer, promising professional help was near. Once paramedics arrived, Ivy quickly briefed them, her tone concise but filled with the kind of thorough detail only someone deeply familiar with emergencies could provide. "Anaphylactic shock," she explained, pointing out the injection site and describing the man's symptoms and response. The paramedics nodded appreciatively, their professional respect evident. As the team hurried the man onto a stretcher, guests shifted away, the atmosphere charged but relieved. The earlier skepticism was replaced by a reverent silence as people processed what had happened. Several whispered acknowledgments passed between staff and guests alike. Ivy stepped back behind her desk, her modest smile returning but now accompanied by a quiet confidence. The mocking voices she'd heard earlier were conspicuously silent, replaced by wide, curious eyes. No longer invisible, Ivy had commanded the room, and saved a life. The crowd's startled gasps still echoed faintly in Ivy Monroe's ears as she retreated to her quiet corner behind the reception desk. But beneath the surface of that gala night, her mind unfolded a different scene altogether. A life stitched together by countless moments of urgency and care that had shaped who she was before the years of quiet service behind this modest desk. Years earlier, Ivy had been a paramedic, a frontline emergency medical technician rushing into crises instead of away from them. She remembered the rhythmic beeping of ambulance monitors, the taste of metallic air mixed with adrenaline as she braced herself for the next call. Nights were often long and brutal, filled with screeches of tires, shouted instructions, and the steady, soothing reassurance she gave to frightened strangers. Her hands, now slender and delicate-looking from years of less physical work, had once steadied broken limbs and administered life-saving injections with practiced precision. One scene burned brightly in her memory, a cold winter night far from the Gala's glittering lights, where Ivy crouched beside a car crash victim pinned beneath twisted metal. Her voice had been firm yet gentle, coaxing conscious awareness out of the shock. "You're going to be okay. Just hold on," she had promised, fingers checking pulse and airway as her partner worked the jaws of life. The patient's gratitude, a simple squeeze of her hand as help came, had remained etched in Ivy's heart. Those years as a paramedic were her calling, a role that brought purpose and pride. But that life wasn't without pain. Ivy was a single mother to a bright daughter, Grace, born into a world that didn't pause for ambulances. The demanding, unpredictable shifts meant late nights, missed school events, and constant exhaustion. Money was a steady worry. Despite all Ivy's efforts, the strain was undeniable. Eventually, the emergency service where Ivy worked faced severe budget cuts. Overnight, staff reductions swept through the department, and Ivy found herself laid off, a casualty of shrinking resources despite her dedication and record. It was one of those cruel ironies of bureaucracy that left many competent people out of work. Her skill and experience, honed through years of service, suddenly seemed irrelevant to the administrator's spreadsheets. She scoured every possible opportunity for work that could sustain her and Grace, applying for paramedic roles at other districts, but age, gaps in recent formal certification, and the stigma of unemployment followed her like shadows. So she accepted various modest jobs, mostly clerical or front-of-house roles, where she could at least keep steady hours and provide a semblance of stability. The receptionist position at the Lancaster Hotel's Gala was just one of many stops along this difficult, unglamorous path. There was a quiet dignity in her deliberate choice to remain unobtrusive in these roles. Ivy had learned to temper her pride with pragmatism, to hold back the fierce sense of worth that once fueled her in emergency medicine. The toll of supporting a child alone, without the luxury of significant social support, pressed down on her. Quietly, she grieved the loss of her old identity, even as she fulfilled her daily duties with courtesy and respect. One vivid memory rose unbidden from that earlier time, Ivy sitting beside Grace on their cramped apartment balcony, the city's muffled roar below. Grace had been no more than 6, her small hand clutching Ivy's finger tightly. "Mom, will you be my hero forever?" the girl had whispered. Ivy smiled then, even through tears. "Always," she promised, though uncertainty shadowed her heart. In another scene, Ivy recalled the overwhelming fatigue after a grueling 12-hour night shift when all she wanted was to collapse but instead found herself ironing Grace's school uniform, chasing sleep with the lingering echo of distress calls. The weight of responsibility was constant, invisible to most, but crushingly real to her. This blending of strength and vulnerability had woven through Ivy's life, shaping an inner resilience that few outside her trusted circle ever glimpsed. Yet, despite the heartbreaks and hardships, the spark of determination had never fully dimmed. Keep a low profile. That was the unspoken rule Ivy now lived by: avoid attention, don't complicate your life, stay invisible in plain sight. After all, the world of the Gala and the elite was far removed from the gritty urgency of emergency medical response. What could a receptionist do in the face of fame and wealth? But tonight, as she had stepped forward, instincts shuttered long ago by circumstances had burst through with vivid clarity. The calm she had shown was not accidental but a product of hard-earned skill and countless hours lost in hospitals, ambulances, and crisis scenes. And yet, she had carried another burden too, the guilt of being unable to fully reclaim her role in emergency care, to return to the job she so loved. Watching others advance, hearing about new techniques in technology, Ivy sometimes doubted if she could catch up. Shadowed by time and personal sacrifice, those doubts had weighed heavily on her resolve. Through all this, Grace remained her anchor. Ivy's thoughts drifted to the little girl's smile, the color of her laughter, the way her hand felt wrapped around hers. Even on the darkest days, motherhood gave Ivy reason, hope that she could still rise, even if the path back was steep and uncertain. As the memory faded, Ivy found herself once more present behind the reception desk, the Gala's sparkling chaos returning to focus. Guests who had once ignored her now exchanged curious glances. The whispered laughs, the sneers about her accent and attire, they seemed a world away from the quiet knowledge that had guided her through the emergency she just managed. Ivy gathered herself, smoothing her blouse and adjusting her simple name badge. Years of quiet sacrifice had not been for nothing. Beneath her modest exterior pulsed the heart of a woman who knew what it meant to save a life, in silence or in the bright glare of crisis. That night, Ivy Monroe was no longer just a receptionist. She was someone who held the breath of a room and returned life. And beneath the surface, the strength of her history waited, ready to rise again. The echoes of the night's sudden crisis had barely faded when a subtle but undeniable shift swept through the Lancaster Hotel's grand ballroom. Ivy Monroe, the modest receptionist who had long gone unnoticed beneath the gloss and glitter of exclusive galas, suddenly found herself in the bright, unyielding light of recognition. The man she had saved approached her first, his gait still unsteady but his gratitude unmistakable. "Ivy," he said, voice soft but urgent. "I don't know how to thank you enough. You saved my life tonight." His eyes, still shadowed by the fear of what might have been, glistened with genuine warmth. Ivy's smile was quiet but deep, a mixture of relief and humility. "I'm glad you're okay," she replied, sincerity grounding every word. Word of Ivy's swift, composed intervention spread quickly among the guests, the staff, and even the event's elite attendees, their earlier skepticism now melting into admiration. A few clustered by tables, whispering fervently, while others openly shared their versions of the story. "Have you heard about the receptionist? She's the one who stepped in when no one else did," one guest remarked to a fascinated companion. The gala's event manager, Emily Renner, a woman known for her exacting standards and polished public face, sought Ivy out where she stood by the entrance desk. "Ivy, I can't thank you enough," Emily said, her tone earnest, momentarily shedding her usual composed veneer. "Your calmness and clarity were exactly what we needed. You kept everyone grounded." There was an unmistakable respect in her voice, a promise that Ivy's role tonight was no longer overlooked. Meanwhile, social media buzzed with clips and testimonials from stunned attendees who had captured moments from the emergency. Videos circulated rapidly, capturing Ivy's calm command as she directed guests, administered the epinephrine injection, and reassured the panicked crowd. The footage spread beyond the event's immediate circle, shared enthusiastically by fashion bloggers, local news outlets, and ordinary people moved by an unassuming woman's heroism amid opulence. Backstage, Ivy's colleagues who had previously barely acknowledged her began to behave differently. Wait staff who once ignored her now exchanged brief smiles and nods. The coat check attendants offered friendly greetings, and even the hotel's polished concierges looked her way with newfound respect. Despite her usual reserved nature, Ivy noticed the difference with a mixture of surprise and cautious acceptance. One of the bartenders, a young man named Lucas, approached her hesitantly. "Hey, Ivy, I just wanted to say, you handled that like a pro. I'm sorry if I ever seemed rude before." His words, shy but genuine, surprised Ivy. She nodded, feeling an unexpected warmth. "Thank you, Lucas," she replied simply. Throughout the following day, media reports helped unearth Ivy's past. Online forums and community groups unearthed photographs of her in her EMT uniform, shared interviews from years past where she spoke passionately about her work in single motherhood, and glowing testimonials from people she had helped. Messages poured in, friends, former colleagues, and strangers alike applauded her courage. An article published on a respected local news website offered a detailed account of the emergency, praising Ivy's intervention as a remarkable act of calm and competence. It included quotes from eyewitnesses, the man she saved, and event staff, all emphasizing the life-saving difference made by someone who had been marginalized in the midst of grandeur. The accompanying photographs showed Ivy in her simple attire, a quiet heroine amidst the glitz. Despite the growing attention, Ivy remained grounded. She continued her work with humility, neither seeking the spotlight nor shying completely away. When guests now entered the gala, several greeted her politely, some with words of thanks. The previously invisible receptionist was now a quietly admired figure, respected for her skills and courage. Even Emily Renner began to see Ivy differently. "You have a gift, Ivy," she said during a brief hallway encounter. "You have poise under pressure, and that kind of strength is rare." Ivy smiled in gratitude but demurred, not yet ready to step fully into this new identity unfolding before her. Among her closest confidants was May, the head housekeeper who had witnessed the events with a mixture of awe and pride. "It's about time they see what you were always capable of," May said with a knowing glance. "You didn't stop being that person, you just had to wait for the right moment." At home, Grace noticed the change in her mother. The tired lines on Ivy's face softened, replaced by a quiet confidence that seemed to brighten the small apartment they shared. "Mom, everyone's talking about what you did," Grace exclaimed, eyes wide with pride. Ivy hugged her tightly, feeling a swell of emotion she usually kept carefully tucked away. Yet, even as the accolades grew, Ivy understood the journey ahead remained uncertain. Recognition was one thing, reclaiming her place in the medical world, balancing motherhood, and redefining her path was quite another. But this night had changed something fundamental. The self-doubt that had shadowed her presence was lifting, replaced by a budding hope, a subtle invitation to engage with her true self once more. The gala itself became a touchstone for many, a reminder that heroism could emerge in the humblest form, in unexpected places, and often from those least assumed to lead. Ivy Monroe, the receptionist once overlooked and dismissed, had shifted the narrative of the evening and, quietly, the story of her own life. The whispers of doubt were replaced with voices of respect, and in the rooms of glittering wealth where appearances once ruled, a genuine truth had been recognized. The name Ivy Monroe no longer faded into the background. Instead, it lingered, spoken with admiration, whispered with gratitude, and now, more than ever, embraced by a woman ready to face what was next. Days passed after the gala, and the ripples of Ivy Monroe's swift and steady action continued spreading through the city's professional and social circles. Her phone rang early one morning, the screen flashing an unknown number at first, then revealing itself as a call from the city's Emergency Medical Training Institute. Ivy hesitated before answering, the chill of uncertainty creeping up her spine despite the renewed confidence she'd been building all week. "Ms. Monroe," a clear, warm voice began, "we wanted to personally reach out and commend you for your incredible composure during last week's emergency at the Lancaster Hotel Gala." Ivy's pulse quickened, but she stayed composed. "Your actions saved a man's life, and we believe your skills and experience would be invaluable as we prepare the next cohort of paramedics. We'd like to offer you a spot in our paramedic recertification program. More than that, there's an opportunity to become an instructor and train others in emergency response." The offer, a lifeline tossed across uncertain waters, felt almost surreal. Ivy steadied herself, the years of self-doubt and hesitation surfacing. Could she step back into the demanding world she had left behind? Was it possible to balance training others, perhaps working shifts again, while raising Grace and managing their modest home? She took a deep breath, the memory of last week's adrenaline replacing some of her doubt. The gratitude from the man she saved, the supportive words from colleagues and even strangers online, all these fueled a quiet strength inside her. It was an affirmation she hadn't allowed herself to embrace fully until now. Later that morning, Ivy sat across from Emily Renner, the gala's event manager who had become something of an unexpected ally. "The Institute called me to recommend you," Emily said with a smile. "They've seen the videos circulating online. Ivy, you're a natural leader, why hide that? You've earned the chance to reclaim your space." Ivy nodded slowly, the weight of past uncertainties beginning to lift. "I'm scared," she admitted quietly. It's been so long. And Grace needs me. Emily reached across the table. You're stronger than you know. Grace will be proud. That afternoon, Ivy shared the news with Grace, her daughter's eyes filling with excitement and wonder. Mom, you're amazing. I knew you were special. The girl's enthusiasm was infectious, breathing renewed courage into Ivy's heart. Over the following weeks, Ivy dove into the recertification program, awakening muscles and skills long dormant but far from forgotten. The training center buzzed with energy, young recruits eager to learn, seasoned professionals refreshing skills, and Ivy, quietly transforming from the woman who had once chosen invisibility into a confident instructor ready to inspire. Her days became a balancing act as she navigated between rigorous classes and evening homework, alongside playing the roles she'd always embraced: mother, homemaker, and now mentor. It wasn't easy. There were moments when exhaustion clawed at her resolve, and doubts tugged at the edges of her mind. But each time she felt overwhelmed, she recalled the moment in the grand ballroom, the man's eyes searching for help, her own steady hands, the breathless silence breaking into relief. Within the classroom, Ivy's presence evolved quickly. Her colleagues admired not only her expertise but also the empathy she brought to teaching. One student remarked during a break, "She actually makes you want to be better, not just for the job, but for the people we'll help." Ivy smiled, aware that this was more than a job, it was a calling she could no longer ignore. Outside the training center, the world seemed to see her in a new light. Invitations came for community talks about emergency preparedness. A local foundation for single mothers with medical backgrounds offered a grant to support her continued education and childcare. These gestures, unexpected and generous, reinforced the truth that Ivy's talents and dedication mattered beyond the anonymity of her receptionist role. One crisp morning, clad in a freshly pressed new uniform, Ivy stood before a mirror in the training facility's locker room. The badge pinned to her chest gleamed under the fluorescent lights. She inhaled deeply and allowed herself a small, steadying smile. This uniform was different. It was a symbol of reclaimed strength, renewed purpose, and a future no longer confined to the sidelines. Her phone buzzed, a message from Grace popped up. "Can't wait to see you after class. Love you, Mom." Ivy pocketed the phone and walked toward the classroom, her footsteps echoing with quiet determination. Later that evening, when Ivy returned home, Grace greeted her with a tight embrace. The mother and daughter settled onto their worn couch, laughter and stories filling the room. The comfort of that simple moment was a powerful reminder that Ivy's journey wasn't just about professional rebirth. It was about building a life true to who she had always been. Ivy Monroe, once an invisible receptionist at a grand gala, was now visible like never before, a woman who answered the call, reclaimed her past strength, and stood ready for the challenges ahead. No longer afraid, no longer hidden, she embraced the new chapters unfolding with courage rooted in love, skill, and unwavering resilience.